Well, we see this in this text that if Jesus left us here to do the work on earth of telling men and women about Christ, and if Jesus saved us to share the gospel, the good news of salvation with all we would meet, then there are few things in our life more exciting than to actually learn from Jesus Christ our Master His message and the way He called men, women, boys, and girls to salvation. Well, this is perhaps one of the most vital topics and messages that we could ever share together. And as we get ready, I'm going to be going through the book of Acts. And by the way, there are 22 different gospel presentations in the book of Acts. 28 chapters, 22 times we can find a specific gospel presentation by one of the apostles or by one of the designates of the apostles to individuals. So you might want to get your pen ready. And I already practiced this week. I was so excited about it. I shared it with the elders and just had them marking as fast as they could, noting this in their Bibles, because we are going to see in the pages of the Gospels, through the eyes of the apostles in the book of Acts, the message of Jesus. And we are going to start right here in Mark, launch through Acts, and then go up into these 22 events. Well, in verse 38 of Mark's Gospel, chapter 1, we're going to, and I'm going to read it together with you in just a minute, but we're looking at Jesus going out preaching to all the people he could find in Galilee. Galilee in the time of Jesus was composed of no less, listen, than 3.6 million people. Isn't that about the population of the whole state of Oklahoma? I don't know, 3-4 million, something like that. That's how many lived around the Sea of Galilee in the time of Christ. That means it was densely populated. It was one continuous stretch of villages, 240 villages with 15,000 people with no high-rises, dense population. And in that place, the governor of Galilee, by the name of Josephus, tells us that in the era of Christ's ministry, 3.5 million people lived. And so into this heavily populated area, Jesus went out preaching a message to everyone who would listen to him. And with him, as he went out for 3 years, were 12 camcorders. You say, what do you mean by that? 12 men who just were like this. They were recording everything he said and everything he did. They just couldn't keep their eyes off of him. They were watching, how he prayed, and how he talked to them, and how he walked on the water. And they were just like photographic film exposed to God. And those 12 men who constantly recorded, capturing his words, his passion, and his method, were left behind. Jesus said, you stay. I'm ascending back to my Father. And he says, I want you to keep up the work of the gospel. I want you to do what I did in giving the good news to the world. Now, let's look at that this morning in Mark chapter 1, verses 38 and 39. It says in Mark chapter 1, 38, but he said to them, let's go into the next towns, another of the 240 towns, that I may preach, and that's what we're going to look at, what he said, there also, because for this purpose I came forth. And verse 39, and he was preaching in their synagogues throughout all Galilee and casting out demons. If you'd turn now past the Gospels to the last chapter of Luke, and as you're turning to Luke 24, I want you to know that you're passing over all 89 chapters of the gospel record. We're going by all the 250 events of Christ's ministry. We're passing over all 3+ years of Christ's earthly ministry. We're going over all of his countless sermons, all of his personal soul-winning events, and all the private teaching he performed and offered to his disciples. And we're looking in verse 46 of Luke 24, verse 44. Let's back all the way up to 44. We're looking at Jesus after his resurrection, summarizing his whole ministry. Okay, I love summaries. I remember I used to get so bored in Elizabethan literature class when I was at Michigan State University that I used to go down and buy those, what are they called, Cliff Notes. It was so boring reading those plays, I would want to get the summary before I had to read them. Sometimes we get a little anxious and we want to cut corners. And I remember I used to read those and then I'd read the book and I understood it. Well, here's Jesus summarizing what couldn't even be written down. There was so much. And Jesus, in chapter 24 of Luke, verse 44, summarizes his entire ministry on earth, his message. And he said to them, verse 44, "These are the words I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me." In other words, he said, my life was a walking fulfillment of the Scriptures. I always did God's will. I fulfilled the Scriptures. And then it says, verse 45, "And he opened their understandings that they might comprehend the Scriptures." So he kind of, in one little twist there, he just opened the floodgates, and all of a sudden, all the lessons and the Scriptures just started flowing together. Verse 46, "Then he said to them, thus it is written, and thus it was necessary for Christ to suffer and rise from the dead the third day." Now look at this. This is fascinating to me. When Jesus summarizes, he said, all of Moses and the prophets and all of my earthly life was lived. Verse 47, "And that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem, and you're witnesses. And I'm sending the promise of the Father, and you're going to go out and do this."